Okay, we are recording and I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everybody see that? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it, Liz.
Okay, and then so really side note, I was trying to find like a Latino, Latinx type thing, and the only thing I could find was the Dia de los Muertos type background. So work with me here on this one. But anyways, welcome everybody. My name is Elizabeth Solano, or you can call me Liz. I am the National Vice President of Membership Affairs for Theta Nu Xi Multicultural Sorority Incorporated. I am also a site coordinator with Communities and Schools of Richmond. Communities and Schools is a national organization, and I'm part of the Richmond affiliate. And the work that I do is centered around working with immigrant and undocumented families in the school system and making sure that their students have, or their children, have everything that they need to succeed in school and in life. And I'm really excited to be presenting this wonderful panel with you all today. Before we get started though, I do want to go over a couple little things with you. If I can, there we go. Closed captioning is available. So if anybody needs this accessibility, there should be the closed captioning button on the bottom row of the Zoom, bar thing at the bottom. And then for those who are watching and viewing this panel discussion, we want you to be part of the discussion as well. So please feel free to comment in the chat box whenever you hear something that sounds really interesting or that you agree with, or if something that somebody said makes you question, like you have further questions, go ahead and use a chat box. You don't have to wait until the very end. We will be doing question and answers at the end. However, we don't want you to forget your question during the conversation. So feel free to use the chat box and we will revisit that when it's time. And of course, just help us out by keeping yourself mute if possible. And yeah, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Quetzal Morales, the Director of Communications for Theta Nu Xi, who will help me introduce our lovely panelists.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that came out tonight. We're excited to host this panel, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So we're going to get started with Diana Melendez. She is an immigration attorney. Her preferred pronouns are she, her, and she is a community advocate who's passionate about helping communities of colors to create and take up space in areas not traditionally built for us. Driven by her experiences as an advocate for immigrant and low-income communities and her own personal journey as a first-generation college and law school graduate, Diana strives to serve her community through helping bridge the access to justice gap and empowering our community members to reclaim their power. As a result, Diana founded a law firm, DM Law PLLC, committed to providing clients the services they need to not only survive but thrive, and where clients can, with the help of an advocate, they can relate to and trust and reach their full potential. Additionally, Diana is a co-founder for Women X of Color, Collective ATX, an organization dedicated to empowering and uplifting and educating Black, Indigenous, and women of color, by creating community and giving members a safe space and a platform to their authentic selves. Diana, a proud El Paso native, has called us Austin, Texas home since 2003. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin and her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. Most days you can catch her jogging at Lady Bird Lake Trail. She enjoys dancing, reading, traveling, and connecting with friends and family. So thank you, Diana, for being here. We're really lucky to have you. And then we'll move on to the next one. So we have Victor Garias. So he is a bilingual ESL high school counselor. So if for those that don't know what ESL is, it's English as a second language. His preferred pronouns are he, him, and él. And his biography is, so he is a Honduran American, first generation, born in Washington, D.C., raised in PG County and Montgomery County, MD. So he was born and raised in the DMV. So I don't know what that means because I'm not from that area, but I've heard a lot of my DC folks and Virginia folks say that. So graduated from the University of Maryland with a bachelor's in sociology in May of 2012. And he also graduated from Johns Hopkins University School of Education with a master's in academic and clinical counseling in May 2016. He has previously worked for Montgomery County Public Schools as a ESL instructor from 2012 to 2015, then began a career as a school counselor for Fairfax County Public Schools from 2016 to 2020. Currently the lead ESL counselor at George Wythe, I hope I said that right, High School for Richmond City Public Schools. He enjoys lyrical hip hop, roots reggae, boxing, comic book, pop culture, exploring new metropolitan cities, and trying different foods. All right, and then we'll move on to Alex Caballero. She is a human services worker. Her preferred pronouns are she, her, ella. So her biography, she goes by the name, so her actual name is Alexandra. She goes by the name Alex. She is half Salvadorian and half Mexican, second generation American who was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Northern Virginia metropolitan area. She graduated with her bachelor's of social work degree from Virginia Commonwealth University in May 2013, and then went to earn her master's of social work EMSW degree from George Mason University in May 2017. She also joined the National Sorority of Sigma Lambda Upsilon Señoritas Latinas Unidas Sorority Incorporated. We love Greek unity, so shout out to her sorors if there's any of them here. As a graduate student in the spring of 2016 through the Theta Theta Graduate Professional Chapter in the DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia metropolitan area. Currently works for Fairfax County government as a bilingual human service worker in the level 3 position, who specifically focuses on case management of social services, and is also previously served in multiple leadership positions through her sororities chapter in the Mid-Atlantic region. And then we have Dr. Ferreira, who is a college professor. Her pronouns are she, her, ella. Originally from Colombia, Dr. Ferreira moved to the States 12 years ago to pursue her PhD in literature and cultural studies at Georgetown University. Today, she is a professor at the University of Indianapolis, where she teaches and researches Latin America literature, languages, and culture. Besides her scholarly career, she has been working with several organizations like the South Texas Human Rights Center, the Coalition for Our Immigrant Neighbors, and others. And I believe we have Sor Maralis Mercado Emerson. Her preferred pronouns are she, her, they, ella. Maralis is a clinical research coordinator at Duke University and chair to the mayor of Durham's Hispanic Latino Committee. In this role, among others, she works to promote community resilience and well-being. After almost 20 years in public health, student affairs, coaching, and creating interventions, Maralis understands that there is a lot of decolonized understanding of success to find beyond the colonized confines of her next paycheck. Through research, capacity building, and coaching, she works with clients towards self-preservation, living in purpose, and advocacy. Through her work, Maralis is committed sharing stories that lead to collective healing And when she's not working the 9 to 5 or volunteering, Maraliz is catching up on the latest baking show or loving and spending time with the Emerson men and running Reclaim the He Well LLC. So that's it for our panelists. We're really excited and we'll get started. I'll hand it back to Liz.
All right, thank you, Quetzal. So, to my panelists, my first question to you is, can you briefly describe what motivated you to serve the undocumented and immigrant population? And we could start with Maraliz.
Hello. So I'm a first generation born in Florida, parents of Dominican and Puerto Rican parents, or daughter to a Dominican and Puerto Rican parents. And so for the longest, I've been doing research in sexual health education, specifically working with Black and Brown youth. And the current project that I'm working on, I just happen to be blessed with, honestly. It's looking at stress, health, and resiliency in Latinx immigrants here in the Triangle area. And I fell in love with it. I was already doing community service work with the Latino immigrants here in Durham. And it gave me an opportunity to do more and to really listen to the stories and give people time, which is one of the things that they were asking for. And so it came to pass that it was a gift that was given to me, and it's been amazing every single day.
So I'll go next. So not to piggyback off of what was just said by Maraliz, but one of the things I can relate definitely is, as I was mentioned in my bio, is that I was born and raised in the DMV area, specifically within the hub of PG County and Montgomery County. One of the most significant things I think about where I came from is that beyond the fact that we tend to identify with the DC metropolitan area, as a youngin', I remember looking around me and pretty much everyone had the same skin complexion as me, spoke a different language, or was just in some way or some form just very similar to my lifestyle and how my family lived, from, again, like speaking a different language to certain cultural similarities. And as I got older, I realized that like my education was one of my biggest assets as I just developed as a human being, is what I saw it as. But it wasn't until really like I started to really work a little bit more in depth with undocumented students. Look, when I started my career in education, it was actually as an instructional assistant at my old high school. That eventually transformed into a full-time instruction position, but still working with the same demographic. At the time I was young, I was 22 years old. And if anyone knows anything about working with students who are learning English as a second language, you got kids that are 19, 20, 18, and then for them to have a 22-year-old instructor, you could imagine how many times they would open up. So over time, it just manifested into me digging a little deeper, realizing in order for me as an individual, along with the team that I collaborate with, something needed to change. And so that then eventually manifested into me looking into school counseling, so that I'm able to maybe perhaps have a little bit more autonomy with how I work with families today.
Well, if I can jump here, I will say that it was sort of random for me, because I was living in Colombia for almost all my life, so I never felt like an outsider. I was even white in Colombia. And then I was growing up there, and I finished my undergrad and my first master's degree, and I then moved here to complete my grad school in the DMV area, by the way. So hey, so I also live 8 years in DC, and when I was living in Colombia, I was working with indigenous communities. So most of my research, or most of my work for my entire life, has been with Native Americans in Colombia and in Peru and Ecuador, like in the Andes And I was, of course, interested in race and relationship between races, but specifically in Latin America. So when I moved to the States like 12 years ago, and I like there was a lot of information that a cultural shock that happens when I move, and of course my like many things in my life, but also in my research change, and I start being very interested in immigration and of course the Latino community in the United States, and initially my interest was more like academic in the sense of like studying what were the relationships between races and the Latino community in the United States. But at some point I realized that I needed to do something. So part of my job, of course, is with my students, because I have many students who are Latinos, and they like, I think that because I'm a Latina, there are a lot of the students who come to me, like they think that my office is a safe space for them. So they come, some of them came up as undocumented, and some of them, I mean, I have been sharing their lives, and they share their lives with me. And then in that direction, I end up working more at the border and with after I live in DC for many years. I moved here, and now I'm living in Indiana, in Indianapolis. And that was like a second cultural shock, because I moved from a very diverse and very international city to the Midwest, with where I feel at the beginning it was very difficult for me, because I feel very isolated and very like singled out. Like everybody always, because of my accent, ask me where I'm from. So like I was an outsider, like, and I feel it for the very first time when I moved to Indiana. But I also think that that's also part of the importance of me being here, and for my students to have a professor of color and like a Latino person as a faculty. I think I could make more an impact here than I was doing, and like in a more diverse environment.
So for me, I work in the government sector specifically. And so my clients, they range from age-wise, they could be very older adults to like very young adults who've just started establishing their families, to now they've already gone into a different, phase of their life. And so what I started seeing, like, I went into social work, so I knew I was going to work with all types of populations as that being my major. I didn't start officially working with the undocumented community until I got into my current job now about 3 years ago. And so when I started receiving like my cases and growing my caseload and so forth, I just started noticing that the majority of my clients were undocumented, but their children were US born citizens. And so I just noticed that there was such a trend of like their selflessness. Like they didn't care if they received any social services, they wanted their children to receive the services that were needed. And I was just so, taken aback. I mean, I knew as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I could understand as a parent, they would want to give the best for their children. But I was just so taken aback, just very struck by the fact that they would give anything and everything just for their children to have services. And they didn't care about, their health or their well-being, in the sense, as long as their children were taken care of, that's what they needed. And so I've been very passionate about making sure I give my clients the best service, because I know in my field it's it's a very fast-paced environment, because I'm doing case management. I have to call clients back very frequently. Clients are in need, and they're always in need, so they're just trying to survive every day. And so I always try to give the best to them and try to meet them and build that rapport with them, because they've had bad experiences, maybe with a previous caseworker who didn't go out of their way to the fullest, or just didn't help them to the best of their ability. And so as a bilingual case manager, I already get a stipend from my job to do my own translations and so forth. And so with that, I feel like when I talk to my clients, they feel already at a very comfortable level speaking to me, because I'm speaking the way I was raised. I'm speaking the same vocabulary and so forth. And it's nothing out of like a text. I'm just speaking to them how I know Spanish. And so they automatically feel a sense of comfort in that just from the very beginning when I talk to them, and use even the same vocabulary when I write things to them for an email or anything, or send them documentation via postal mail. They understand to a certain extent of what I'm saying. The reason I say to a certain extent is because a lot of my clients, unfortunately, who are undocumented are also illiterate. So they don't know how to even read or write. Some of them don't have any educational, or some of them barely got to finishing elementary school education. And so I have to be very, very like basic grammar with my clients for them to even understand what is it that I need in order to help them proceed in getting the services for their children, and possibly give them resources too for themselves that may not come through Fairfax County government, but there are community resources that are available through other organizations that could help them. So I feel like that has given me a passion to advocate for them even further throughout the years.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana. Thank you so much for having me. So I'll try to be brief because my journey with immigration has started back in 2002. I was kind of doing the math. So it actually started, I'm from El Paso, Texas, so it's a border town. And so immigration is kind of a constant, right? Like there's family members in different stages, family and friends who are at different stages of their process. As I was growing up, I didn't really understand it until I started dating a boy in high school who was undocumented, and he wanted to try to get into college. And it was really, here is this person who came by himself at age 15 for a better life, living with an aunt and uncle who don't appreciate him, having to work construction on the weekends, and is really one of the smartest guys I've met, right? But he's in ESL classes, and I feel like not living up to his potential in some of these classes at that time. And he really wanted to go to college. And so I would go with him to try to apply for community college, and everybody would just tell him, no, you're undocumented, you can't go to college. And so the amount of misinformation or disinformation that he was experiencing, and the challenges, and even the consistency, right, that he had to keep trying, that he didn't give up when so many others later I realized had given up when somebody just told them no the first time, was my first experience in personally dealing with a situation like that. And so when I came to Austin for undergrad in 2003, is when I started to learn more about the issues in my community, and just being involved in organizations on campus. And right out of college, I started working for a nonprofit that focused on serving undocumented victims of domestic violence. And so that sparked my interest in the law, although I didn't decide to go to law school until 2015, because as a first generation Mexican American, that wasn't even in my mind. I didn't even realize I could do that. And so I think that the question is I think briefly what motivated me, but I think it's also a continuous journey to try to stay motivated, because this work is so exhausting. So it's been a journey where I have had to kind of take a break from it and then come back, knowing that so many of my community members need somebody who had similar stories to them to relate to and to trust an attorney, because of course our community has so many issues in not trusting attorneys. And that's me.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think when you talked about the whole like exhaustion generally. You know, when we fight for this population, it can be exhausting. So my next question is, what are some barriers that you all have faced in your line of work when it comes to serving this population, whether it's systemic or it's just resistance from the families themselves? What are some things that you've experienced in your line of work? And we can start back with Diana.
Sure. Whew. I mean, for immigration attorneys, I think it's just exhausting all the time, especially during this administration, where it's incredibly difficult to stay up with the constant changes with USCIS policies or the courts, and so that is one huge systemic, I guess, barrier, right, to serving our clients. And of course, I think, you know, I think the other panelists might be able to speak more on this, but, you know, a lot of immigrant clients are the frontline workers, the essential workers who don't get to take time off, or it's really difficult for them to take time off. And I think somebody said it earlier, they're trying to survive every day, right? And so right now, it's really scary for them, their lives at all fronts. Especially now, because it's constantly on the news, they're constantly under attack. And so right now their priority isn't, at least for some clients, it isn't really submitting an application to immigration, is making sure that they're not evicted from their homes. And so there's been a delay in that process, in their immigration process, right? But then of course there's the issue of perhaps the immigration application fees being raised a substantial amount. And right now that's been, you know, halted, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So it's just incredibly difficult for them. Although I do have to say, of course, as many of y'all know, that our community is one of the most resilient communities. And so I know that we will get through this, but right now it's kind of difficult to just briefly say what type of barriers, because I think it just feels so overwhelmingly challenging right now.
So I'll from the research side, what we're seeing here in Durham is what we call a syndemic. A syndemic is multiple epidemics that happen together, but that have the same root, right? And so we have the epidemic of racism, we have the epidemic of COVID, we have the epidemic of, you know, name that tune is happening in the Latinx community. And one of the barriers is that people don't necessarily see us, right? And so as we continue to do this research, one of the things that we have noticed, even from the beginning, because we go into our participants' homes and we have conversations with them and so on and so forth, is that at the end, when we're done with our interview and we ask them, so what did you get from this? And they're like, I got somebody to listen to me, even if it was for 2 hours. You heard my story and you actually sat with me and looked at, like, you paid attention to what I had to say. So, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that when immigrants come to the United States, their health is actually better in their home country than it is when they come here. And the more time that they acculturate and assimilate to being in the United States, their health declines. Their acculturation stress increases. But the cool thing that a lot of people don't know is that though their acculturation stress increases, their resiliency is really, really high, right? A lot of that has to do with things like familism and having this deep, strong connection to people around them, right? Whether they're actual family or family that they have created while being here. And so I think about these things, and I think about, like, the actual barriers that we have to, that we as Latinx folks specifically, Lord, I can't even speak English today. You know, you think about access to healthcare, access to education. Right now, I have folks that are on DACA, and they're just trying to figure out if they're going to be able to stay. literally a colleague is like, well, I'm just hoping it gets approved, because if not, I gotta go back, right? It's, even with the pandemic, it's going to go and get tested and finding out that you're COVID positive, and literally not being able to breathe, but saying something like, I would rather die at home with my family than be separated from them again. How many folks actually have to experience that, right? Like, you would rather literally die than to have to go to the hospital where you don't know if they're gonna call ICE on you. You don't know if they're going to actually care for you. We've had issues with follow-up, and so we've had participants that have been patients and found out they were COVID positive, and no one called to see how they were doing. And this is not new to this area. This is happening all around the country. And so these are real things that are happening to Latinx immigrants, and yet we pay over $30 million in taxes, but people still don't believe that immigrants pay taxes. And so there's this phobia of immigrants, not just Latinx immigrants, but immigrants in general, especially undocumented immigrants, right? So there's more than one. And my thing is, what's the root?
Yeah, so I would add to what both of you have said, like with I've seen a lot with specifically within government, a lot of its policy. I personally have a problem with I work in the Washington, D.C. area, and so where a lot of policymakers are making decisions on all these federal programs, they put all the policies down to the state level, and the state, just I personally feel like they make decisions without even knowing which population they're serving, and they just kind of do it out of a whim because all these policy changes are happening constantly. I have to keep up with my training and so forth as a caseworker, and personally some of it doesn't make sense to me, but again, I just do the job as best as I can. But personally, with a lot of the recent changes, especially with COVID happening, our caseloads have like tripled in a sense, um, and we're all just trying to manage it, as best as can. But with specifically the policies that they have in place for those clients who are undocumented, well, they're not able to get any type of services at all already. It's only their children, and now they're trying to survive a pandemic, which many of them cannot go to work because they either have been infected or a family member has been infected in their home. But at the same time, who's going to make the money in the home? So they have to make a decision, a very hard decision. Then their children are home because they're doing virtual learning, so they have to manage that as well. And so that's one of the barriers that I have seen lately for my clients. Also, another thing is just with language, like when my agency was making the templates and the instructions and the standards of policy of how to do translations, I was very questionable about certain things that they made as a standard for Spanish. And I said, this doesn't make sense. Like, I don't even speak Spanish like that. And I really try to advocate and say, not everybody speaks the same way. You can't expect everyone to format in just one specific template. Everybody's from a different country. In regards to our undocumented or immigrant families who particularly are of Latinx or, Hispanic community. And so it was just very frustrating to have to explain that to my supervisors. And the answer that I would get was, well, this is what, senior management wants us to do. And I still don't follow that because I get paid a language stipend. So I know how to write Spanish that I write. And I really try to advocate and say, you're expecting that our clients, the majority of them are literate and can understand this, but the majority of them are not. So this is like, you're doing a disservice in a sense to them. And so I feel like there's a lot of politics that is a barrier. Also, just in general, calling them aliens, even like in our work, in our systems, our database systems. That's how we have it subcategorized, like alien status. I personally don't like that. And even in my case notes in my writing, I always write immigration status, because I personally feel that that's very offensive. And so I feel like a lot of the barriers I've encountered is a lot of political, not just political in the sense of like nationally, but it goes down to the levels of state and local policy and political decisions.
Well, girl. Well, yeah, indeed. Um, I mean, all of you guys have point like very important things, and I think the aspect of frustration and impotence sometimes we feel because the tools we have are not enough. Sometimes the advice we give is not enough, and sometimes the advice is just wait and let's hope and fill this form and wait what is going to happen, and that could be very frustrating. And I think what Maralis was saying is very important, that sometimes people just need to tell their story and feel heard. And I have been normally during the summers I work in South Texas with a hotline that receive phone calls from mostly people in Latin America who's looking for their family members who are like missing. And most of the time, I mean, it's we try to find their family members, and sometimes they are in jail, they are in prison, sometimes they are dead, and sometimes we cannot find them, and that's most of the cases, no? And it's so frustrating, and so there is nothing we can do, and besides like listening to them and being with them and just listen. And sometimes that's a lot, but of course it's not enough because we don't have the tools and the resources to help them more. So it could be again, as Diana was saying, it could also very taxing in ourselves. No, it's that frustration and it's sadness. No, it's I became very, very emotional. I sometimes cannot work in that phone. I hate that phone. I go there and I work for a month, and I hate every day that I have to work there, because it's people looking for the missing family members is something that is, I don't know, guys. I have extremely respect for people who works with that like the entire year. I just go for a month, and it's extremely taxing. And I think for us, because we are also Latinos, and I have family members who have been undocumented, and I have, so it's very difficult to not make it personal. It's very difficult to not think about when someone is talking about someone the same age as my son or the same age as my brother. Is very difficult not to make it. And for me especially, I saw my prima around here, and we are criers. Like we cry, like I don't know if it's a Latino thing or is it my family, but I cry all the time, and I'm like, oh, I can't. The same happens. I also help a lot with translations, and I work with in legal clinics translating for the lawyers who don't speak Spanish. And it's very difficult for me to be invisible and just translate what they need to say, because I always have like this emotional response, and I try, and I think that I need to explain, like also, as Alex were saying, that it's not just literally translation, but we need to make them, or make us, and make everybody understand. And that's not just translation, we need an explanation, and we need to explain how it works. It's not just sign here or fill the format or hit the link. The translation experience requires much more than just the translation part. And I think it's also another barrier. And of course, as you were saying, also politics, and it's very difficult to deal with all those stuff. I think is fulfilling, and it's great, and it's amazing the work we can do, and at the same time it's very frustrating, and it could be very, very taxing,
I would like to share the the educational perspective, or at least my perspective. Um, I will say yes, I agree with everyone. You know, everything that you said, like as everyone was speaking, some of the concepts that have been brought up, just kind of like I connect the dots with some of like the experiences that I've had and I've seen in the school systems. Um, my first barrier that I'm just going to put it flat out there is language support, especially within the schools. You would be amazed by how many schools have an extremely large Spanish speaking population of students, whether it be English learners or bilingual students, but also just families that speak other languages, of course, right? But you'd be amazed by the lack of language support that can be found just within a school. Um, Over the years, what I've come to learn is that sometimes the way that can occur, like how a school even obtains language support, can be very political, as it was mentioned. Of course, especially with how a school district fluctuates its money to which schools, Title I schools, just it's a lot of politics in between that. But language support is something that I've definitely noticed is one of the biggest barriers within a school system, because many times you have families coming into the school and they simply just want to find out what their kid's lunch pin is, but they're, you know, that mom or that sister or whatever can't go in there and have someone just tell them directly, because there really isn't anyone who can just communicate that with them. Um, with that said, I will also mention that, you know, at least in my experience, what I have seen is that there are many times where certain employees, whether it be teachers sometimes, or even other counselors or administrators, they usually tend to delegate Spanish speaking families, in my experience, for example, over to me, or any other staff member that is native to the language. And I always try to approach that with kind of like this mentality to challenge that. In my current scenario, for example, I will share that one of my goals is to try to get the student services team at George Wythe High School to be able to openly work with their English learners, mainly because maybe it's my own perspective on it, but I think that we're living in a day and age where, you know, language really shouldn't be a big barrier. Like, we have technology, we have apps where you can speak into your phone and it translates it for you. We have the good old Google Translate that everyone knows, right? So I think just with all that combined, like it still is a big obstacle within a school system, is having that comfortable approach in working with individuals that may not speak English as their first language. Um, in addition to that, especially currently during, you know, COVID-19 times, one of the giant discrepancies that I've pointed out is the lack of, I guess, the lack of efforts that can be made on some ends to certain families. I think when it comes to just being an educator, communication with your students along with all your other stakeholders is one of the biggest key components. And just take it here in Richmond City, right? We have a grand amount of students who are English learners, some of them coming from a place where maybe they've never learned how to use a computer. And because they're told that they have to do virtual learning, you'd be amazed by how many WhatsApp video calls I have to make just to guide them step by step. I think that that's become a huge barrier, especially for those families that may have never even touched a computer. So that's just something that, you know, like I've recently pointed out. But in all, like what I've really just come to learn is that when it comes to a school system, there has to be a priority set on the needs. And in some cases, there are some schools, some school districts where those needs aren't always met, you know, just like throughout the world. But those needs aren't always met. And then later on, when there's data collected showing a certain amount of dropouts, or a certain, I guess, like demographic within your school that's not obtaining a certain proficiency in math or English, a lot of those times it's because those resources that are needed were ignored. One of the key goals that I remember being taught, like when going into the profession of being a school counselor, is that we are to try to provide equity, access, and social justice for all. Now, in a realistic perspective, you can only do so much, you know, especially like as of now, where all we can do is really just make a phone call, send a text message, send an email, and hope for the best. You know, I personally am missing the face-to-face, but along it all, like, you know, like someone mentioned resilience, right? Yeah, someone mentioned resilience, and I think that's something that everyone here by now has probably established a good amount of it, right? Just from the level of work that we're doing.
But the burnout is real.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's not.
The burnout is
It's
real.
real. It's real.
And
But that's why I go back to where it's saying like I think what I pride myself in mostly is just like being a Hondureño Americano, you know, learning that I'm also Afro Latino too, like just learning where my roots come from, who my parents were. My father being a hard worker all his life, my mother being someone to teach me, you know, to value education as best as possible, having that privilege of just, you know, that type of support, but also seeing where they come from, and then just seeing the level of work that they put in. Like it basically just instills you, right? Like the grind doesn't stop.
I think there's something, sorry, I think there's something that you said, Victor, that really hit home and really summarized what everyone else has said. And it's kind of like FUBU for us by us, right? Where we're constantly like, you know, trying to help each other out. And that's one of the things about the Latinx is that like we're about community, right? So like someone said to me the other day, you don't see a lot of like homeless Latinos. No, you don't, because you're a stranger and you're gonna move into this house with 12 other people, right? And people are like laughing at that, but the reality of it is like, friend, you just got here. We're gonna make sure that you're at least, you got a roof. You might be sleeping on the floor, pero el piso, hay piso para todo el mundo, right? Like there's floor for everybody. And so like that concept of like you eat, we eat, I eat, like we're not gonna go hungry. Hay pan para todo, right? And so the flip side to that is us as servants to the community, we were exhausted, right? And then multiply that on top of like we were called on, like you said, just because we speak Spanish, you're immediately the interpreter. There's a difference between interpreter and translator, right? I started a whole business because I was like, y'all don't have to pay me because there is no way. It's 25 cents a word, friend, for translation services. And don't let transcribing, you don't have to pay me a lot of money. Because you know, it's a disservice to use my skill because you don't have the time to learn for you. That's not my problem, right? I'm here to serve. And yes, I'm going to do this in this capacity because, you know, on the bottom they put other duties as assigned. We're gonna talk about that later, but it serves as a service because then we're tasked with more work than sometimes we have the capacity to do. And then when we're burnt out, people are like, what's wrong? And there are no mechanisms in place to help us, the ones that are doing this work.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to what you both have said with the language. Like, I came in and I was maybe about a year into the job, and I had just taken the language stipend exam. I had to take like an oral, written, a reading exam, and I had to pass in order to get the stipend. And with my agency, we have language services as a government agency, and we have a phone number you just call, and you say what language, and that's all accessible. Well, once I passed my exam, it was like news to my whole entire office that I was the new certified Spanish language person. And I mean, I figured, okay, I'm going to help my teammates like within my unit. That's understandable. But within like 2 months, I was getting people from other teams, still in my department, but from other supervisors hitting me up to a point. Like, I remember right before COVID, I mean, people were just hitting me up left and right. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting extra, like I'm getting a stipend, but that doesn't mean I have to do it for the whole office. You know, like I just did not. And I would have to tell like people like, I'm a case manager. I'm not your personal translator, you know? So I sometimes would have to be like, I cannot do it today. So if you need it right away, you need to contact our department's language services. Like that's what it's there for, you know? But I would even have like supervisors who weren't even my supervisor contact me like, can you please call this client real quick? And I was like, hold up, that's not even part of my caseload. I have my own caseload to manage. You know, I have my own deadlines. Why am I doing that for you? You know, so thankfully I have moved on to a new supervisor who is bilingual. And so when it was announced that I was transferring to a new supervisor, those requests stopped like that because I was moving to a whole new office. So they knew I wasn't under my old supervisor now. So I mean, I mentioned it to my new supervisor, like, hey, this may happen. And she was like, oh, no. That's not about to happen because you are a caseworker. You are not the Fairfax County government translator. But it's very frustrating. It's like, I feel like people thought I had all the time in the world just to get all these translation emails. And yeah, they could be very simple translations, but it adds up and it becomes time consuming already on top of the work that I have to do. So
You know, one of the things that I experienced was working with other counselors who I again like I in my mind I'm just like how, you know, like question mark. But what I questioned was I guess like the perspective I have with this career is you want to be someone that you can bring people in, right? But then when they don't speak your language, you all of a sudden push away. And maybe it has to do with the comfort of some individuals and whether or not they feel comfortable working, interacting with someone who does not necessarily speak the same language as them, and then therefore there may be a lot of misinterpretations or whatnot. But I kind of make a reference back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like, you know, we live in a day and age now where to have language as the biggest barrier for all of us as human beings is a little obsolete now. You know, I understand if it was like the 1950s, but we're living in 2020 where we have the technology, we have resources that could ideally help us get through in some way. And you know, it's unfortunate that people have to go through these type of experiences because yes, it does cause burnout. It's just like layers that's placed on top of your workload, and then as it was stated, you know, then people ask why, like why are you so tired, why are you so burnt out? But I just kind of like just to I guess add on to what was said already, is just it is a bit frustrating when you want to work with individuals and you want them to have that open-mindedness, but it all falls back to just not feeling comfortable enough to actually want to interact with that person who doesn't speak their language. And of course, like, you know, that eventually will have to change. I'm convinced that within the next 20 years, everybody's going to be speaking Spanish. I'm convinced, unless this administration continues going the way it goes. But
So I just want to say I love this conversation, but I also want to be cognizant of time. So I just want to there's a question I had that all of you were touching on. So I just want to put it more directly for those who may be not from the Latinx community, and you know they are serving this population. If you had like this unfiltered, you know, 1 to 2 sentences that you could tell your colleague or whoever that, you know, what kind of advice would you tell them in the 1 to 2 sentences in terms of being able to truly support this population in the way that we as Latinx do on a day-to-day basis?
Don't patronize me. I help is required, support is required, allies are welcome, but don't patronize me. I know I don't speak English. My English is not perfect. I have an accent, but I know my things. I don't need I don't need your help if it's in a patronizing way. If we can work together, if we are equal and you are recognized that I'm equal than you, welcome, we can work together. But don't think your help is like helping a little brother. No, it's helping an equal. And also recognize your own privilege and your own. I think it's very difficult because sometimes I think when I was living in Colombia, I never really understand what an immigrant was or what being an outsider was. But I know it's very difficult to recognize how other people feel or how other people's experiences. So that's why it's so important to when people is helping or when people want to be a good ally, to let the community take the lead, listen for the Latino community have to say in their own words. And yeah, I think that's in a couple of sentences.
I'll go. Oh, did you want to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I would definitely agree with what was said by Ana Maria. I would say, from my experience, it's definitely empathy, like having a lot of empathy, listening, not generalizing. A lot of, especially when you just see cases and numbers all the time, it's just like a number after number. But that's a person, that's a story, that's a family, and so definitely having empathy and really listening, and not just leaving a person without any type of resource or without any type of service, at least providing, whether it be a phone number, whether it be a website, whether it be a name of an organization, and giving some type of instruction on how you can access that, and making sure that it's known to those clients. There is a Spanish language available if you just make sure you ask for that. I think those are very key, things to make sure to always, when you're serving the Latinx community, especially the undocumented community, and a lot of patience, because they're trying to navigate a system or many systems that they are totally unaware of, on top of maybe not even having translating services and having their children translate for them, which I see very often. And so I would say those are the key things, and making sure really active listening, not just listening, okay, what do you have to say so I can keep going, but really active listening to what is their story and what is their need, and making sure you don't leave them empty-handed, at least giving them a resource to start.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of echo what Ana Maria and Alex said, is check yourself, right? Because we all have privilege and we always forget that. I mean, when we're so tired and it's just constant work, we forget that this is a human being, and this person's case is going to affect not only themselves, but their entire families, right? And so it's much bigger than this just one case. And so constantly reminding myself or yourself of your privileges, and not taking that for granted. And then also what Alex said, especially, is be patient. I think definitely important, because I think somebody also said earlier, is either you're the first person they go to, or you're one of 10s or 20s that they've already been through, and they're frustrated and they're scared and they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know who to trust. And so, and that's major, I guess, in the legal field, right? Because they've gone through attorney after attorney that they don't trust, or they feel like they've stolen their money and they've already invested thousands of dollars. And so they come to you with the wall up and they don't know to trust you. And so that's being patient and again, checking yourself and understanding that that's where they're coming from.
I'm going to say have grace with folks that come to you, but also with yourself. My biggest rule is, if I don't know, I'm going to say I don't know, but I'm going to find somebody that does. That's really, really important because like folks have said, you know, they're scared. There's a lot of mistrust. They're just trying to figure out how the system works. And let's be honest, the system was created so that we can't thrive in it anyway. And so they're trying to figure that out. Yeah, a grace, because some days are better than others and we're just trying to make it to the next day.
Mine would basically be almost as similar as to check your privileges. And I say that mainly because as much as one wants to be supportive, especially within education, we as a society, we have this script already in our head saying that a student or a youngin is supposed to be this. When working within undocumented families, and especially with students, they may be going through other battles that not your average American student is dealing with in some cases, right? So I always go back to this whole ideology where it's like, yes, check your privileges. Remember, not everyone went to school from K to college. Not everyone, had to worry about soccer practice after school. So it falls back into what everyone's saying about how take a step back and really analyze where you're coming from, and then keep in mind that everyone's like apples and oranges. You got people who are apples, you got people who are oranges, you get what I'm saying? It's just like everyone's different. Everyone's a case by case situation.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I want to end on a good note. So if everybody, I'm all about tiny wins, right? Because we talked about fatigue that we all experience in the line of work that we do, whatever field that we are, working for this population definitely requires a lot of energy at times. So you don't always get to see the big wins, but they are tiny wins in between. So if you all can just share a small, tiny win, whether it's been in the past week or sometime in your career, I would love to hear that.
So my tiny win for the week is that we got funded for another phase of a pilot study for interventions using promotoras, community health workers, to go out into the community and work with our Latinx immigrants here in the area. So I still got a job.
Well, I have to say that I organized an event in my school about immigration. It was today also. And normally to those events in my school, when we are face to face, we have like 20 people, 30 people, and that's it. But today through Zoom, thanks COVID, I guess, we have like 100 students attend to the event, and this was this professor talking about immigration specifically in Indiana, which is like a little more difficult than in other places. So I think at least one thing positive about the online setting is that it's easier for some folks to attend some events, and like this one, no, we are here together. So and I also really appreciate, guys, meeting you and hearing from your experiences, like really important.
I'll share a win. Just last week, I got an update from a former student that was on my caseload back when I actually started my career as a counselor. When I first met him, the kid was like 16, 17, coming from El Salvador. And, he did his thing. He went through high school. I was able to see him graduate before I stopped working at the school that we were at. And I just come to learn that he managed to join the Air Force and is now working on I don't exactly know the title, but he's one of those people who flies one of those remote control airplanes, like air simulators. And which is, I'm glad to see, because that was something that he was talking about for like 2 years straight while he was in high school. And he wasn't even sure about what his future would look like, because, at that time, he just didn't know what it was going to look like at all. But the kid graduated, and I come to learn that, oh, wow, he actually did what he said he wanted to do. So that was good to know.
Okay, I can share. I guess I'll share one of my favorite stories. It happened many, many years ago when I was in El Paso working for a civil rights project, working with victims of and survivors of domestic violence. We had a client apply for a U visa, which is a visa for victims of crime, and at that time, you know, the application had been pending for her residency already, and so she had been receiving work permits. And my supervisor at the time was this amazing advocate who had been doing this for years. And one of her favorite things to do was, when we got the green card, is call the client and said, "You have very important news. You need to come into the office right away." And so the client didn't get any other information than that, except you need to come to the office. So the client comes with her 4 kids, and my supervisor tells her, "We can't renew your work permit anymore." And so client obviously gets really scared, like, "Why not?" It's like, "Because you're a resident now." And so like the tears falling from the client and the kids was just like, that's a moment I'll never forget, and hopefully have many more.
So my win, it's been happening for many years. I volunteered this summer for the Hispanic College Institute, with Liz has also participated in. And so this program's been going for many years in the summers, and it's hosted within Virginia. And so a win for me is seeing the students. A lot of the students are majority Latinx, and so they start off as high school students just participating, and it's a program to help them, encourage them to seek higher education. Well, I participated as a undergrad volunteer in 2010, so it's been 10 years that I've known the program. And when I came back as a professional now, as a volunteer, just to speak about my experience, seeing so many students having developed and progressed into now in graduate school or already having graduated, and hearing their stories is just so amazing. And a lot of them are coming from undocumented parents, or they are undocumented themselves. And so just seeing them reach their potential is just such an amazing feeling to see. And it's all positivity and positive energy. And so that's just something I always reminisce on and think about all the time when I think about these communities that we're serving.
Aren't our panelists amazing? Like all your tiny wins and your big wins are just amazing to me. And I've been seeing a couple of people say like, "Thank you so much." And I want to open it up to them now. Like if they have any questions, or if they just want to share anything generally, you're more than welcome to unmute and share that with us all. And then we can wrap up. No questions for the panelists?
Hi, this is Octavia. I definitely just want to say thank you to everyone for sharing. I found this very informative. I'm actually African American, and I've worked in a lot of settings where I've worked with other clients who are undocumented. And sometimes, I guess for me, it's like, I know there's a trust issue too, like with being outside of the community. And someone was saying, I'm not quite sure which speaker was saying like the language barrier. And I know for me, I really had to push for like my agency to maybe even get like a call, like a setup. Like Spanish is definitely not my first language or language at all. So I really will, and I still try to learn on my own. But certain terms, like when you're talking about in the legal field, that's not something that I commonly would talk about, like as a non-native speaker. So I just wondered, like, are there any other tips? Not that we're being dismissive, if we're like, hey, I want to help, but I don't know like how to communicate like in the language with you. And I don't want to send, I guess like incorrect information because I'm trying and I don't have the language. So, I mean, are there any other tips that you would have, like, that we can help? I'm sorry, that was long, everybody.
I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. You're looking for information on like how to connect with folks?
Yeah, how to connect. Like, I feel like, you know, being outside of the community, like you were saying, is certain things culturally, like everyone may not be from like this particular area, but it's like a shared understanding. I feel like even in the African American community, it's kind of like that. And so I think it was Carlos that was mentioning about like maybe people being dismissive or it coming off as dismissive because of the language barrier. So like I've really tried to get like some of the people at my job to invest in certain things so that we have the tools or someone who can communicate about legal matters. So I just want to know personally, like, are there any other things like to connect a little bit better or like build that trust?
So as for me personally, as an Afro Latina, one of the things that's really helpful is just to understand, like African Americans are not a monolith, neither are Latinos, right? And so in that, there are a lot of similarities that a lot of people don't realize between the African American community and the Latinx community that are super helpful in establishing trust and relationship. Unfortunately right now, a lot of the relationships between the Black and Brown community is really strained. And a lot of that has to do with what, you know, our elders have learned in their home countries and or here in the United States about what it means to be Latinx here in the United States, or what it means to be Black, whether it's here in our country or back home. As far as, you know, just being able to connect, it's getting familiar with what the Latinx population looks like in your community is super helpful, because then you're going to be able to know, you know, how to at least where to look for information. So I know in Miami, my population is going to be predominantly Cuban and Puerto Rican in New York and Dominican in New York, but here in the Triangle area is a Salvadorian and Mexican. So I immediately have to tell them, my Spanish is not the same as your Spanish. I might cuss at you, just tell me what that word was so I don't say it again. I accidentally told people to do something real inappropriate once, but that was my apologies. But that's the reality, right? And so if I know who's in my community, I'm gonna be able to better serve them in a way that they're going to be able to connect with.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, just to add to that, as I think we, especially it's my case, probably not everybody's, but everybody used to think or tend to think that we are all Mexicans, for instance. It's more like you were saying, like when sometimes in the United States, people used to like tend to think that all Latinos are Mexican. So, so yeah, so that like more like as Marilis was saying, like we are so different and so diverse, and just recognize how that diversity among us is always like, yeah, I love tacos, but going to a Mexican restaurant is going to a international restaurant for me as well. So
thank you.
Any other questions for our panelists? You could put it in the chat too if you want. Okay, so that concludes our discussion for the evening. I mean, I could talk about this all day long, but you know, it's getting late for us on the East Coast, so I want to respect everybody's time, especially because it's been a long day for some of us too. But thank you so much to all of our panelists. I mean, you all are just amazing. You know, this really showed me that regardless of what field we are in or what work we're doing, we have so much commonality when it comes to our work, our identities, and how they translate into what we do. And also just our commitment to this community. So I celebrate you. I uplift you every day. Thank you so much for taking the time out. For those who are participating by, listening to this whole discussion, thank you for being here. I hope you were able to take something away, and just know that if you have any questions, I know for myself, I'm happy to, connect. Before we go, I want to turn it over to Quetzal. And Quetzal, can you talk about our event tomorrow? Because this is part of a whole week's worth of events, and we just want to share with you one more event that we have going on to close out our week of TNX Latinx Herencia Week.
Yeah, so tomorrow, so during my undergrad and still till this day, I am a host at the local radio station at Utah State University. I was one of the first Spanish shows that started hosting different kinds of music, because it's like an alternative radio, and I was just like, this is so boring. This is not offense, but white people music. I want something that I can connect to. I want salsa and reggaeton. So it kind of inspired me to start my my own radio show. So I've been doing that. I did take a break from it this semester, just because I was recently transitioned into the director of communications role here in the sorority. So I took a break, but I kind of want to do something similar to that. So I'm hosting a little cafecito con Quetzal. That's the name of my show. So Coffee with Quetzal. And I talk about culture and stuff like that, but I want it to be something fun for people to come out and just listen to a playlist that I put together. So if anybody wants to come, y'all are welcome. I swear, I assign myself as the national DJ for Theta Psi, so but y'all are welcome to come, and I'm excited to host the show tomorrow. And thank you to our panelists and Liz for putting this panel together, because she was the one that came up with the questions and gathered the information for the panelists. So I'm grateful for Liz and doing this with her, and the panelists for taking the time of your day to help us better understand how to work with undocumented populations. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, because the panelists are what really made this event amazing. So thank you all. Just so you all know, again, sorry, I keep throwing little things, but this is being recorded. Like I mentioned earlier, this will be on YouTube. So if you do know of any colleagues that weren't able to make it and you think they could really benefit from listening to this discussion, that information will be forthcoming. And other than that, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great evening, and I will hopefully see you all sometime soon, or somewhere in the world. Adios.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Adios. Gracias.
Bye.
Ciao.
Adios.
See y'all.
Y'all have a good one.
Bye, Quetzal. Thank you.